Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis. I'm joined by Keith Preston and Musonius Rufus to discuss the latest events in Charlottesville and the sort of
Oh,
reaction
Todd,
to it.
I'm afraid I can't. I just can't hear you. This is some sort of technological issue. I suppose. Let me try to figure it out again. Sorry,
Okay.
I'm sorry, gentlemen, for this.
Oh, it happens. So I'm going to start off just Keith by saying what I appear to know at the moment is that the Unite the Right rally, whatever they were hoping to do, from what I know, they in advance came up and filed all the correct paperwork to get a space to do this. And then what happened was, at the last minute, the mayor of Charlottesville or somebody tried to pull their right to protest, or not protest, but to rally. And then they took it to court and they won. And from what I saw in your article, Keith, is that when they showed up, they were also, as was expected, left-wing protesters. Initially, as you said, peaceful. And then Antifa and BLM types came in and it started to get violent fast. Now, what's interesting is that Vice did a video where they mostly focused on Christopher Cantwell. But even though they were against Cantwell and the rally, it's fairly clear that the left was extremely violent and probably incited it. And this is from a pro-left source, but their own footage couldn't even deny the fact that the left was extremely violent there. Now, and then of course there was the accident, or not the accident, but the incident rather, after the violence got escalated, where a woman was killed, where a car ran into her. Now, the details of that, I think, are still rather sketchy. Well, what do you know exactly about that car incident, Keith?
Well, there are a number of different claims that are being made. All anyone knows for sure is that there was this guy, James Field, who had been attending the rally. He's associated with the Traditionalist Workers' Party. He was a part of their line and column formation at the event. But at some point, he got in his car, and the videos that have been taken of this, you can see it from several different angles. You see the car speeding down the street, and you see it. It looks like the car drives right into a group of people and hits a car that's in the front of him, and then he speeds off, and it looks like he's speeding backwards. We can't really tell whether he's trying to back up and run into something else, or whether he's simply escaping from the scene or whatever. It looks like there were people that were hit by the car as the car plowed into this crowd. And it looks like some people may have been pinned in between Field's car and another car in front, or perhaps the people were pinned between Field's car and a car that was on the side of the street as well. I saw a video that looked like that was happening. Now, as far as what led to this, several claims have been made. One is that a group of Antifa were actually attacking Field's car and that he was trying to make an escape. Other people say that, no, the attack on the crowd where Fields had actually run his car into the crowd, that took place beforehand. And as he was trying to escape, people jumped on his car and were beating his car with clubs. I did see a video of people on his car attacking his car. It looked like that he had already run into the crowd and that he was backing up. And as he was backing up, people were trying to attack his car. That's what it looked like in the video that I saw. As far as the claim that it was a Reginald Denny type situation where there was a group of people that actually attacked his car and were trying to drag him out of his car to give him a beating or whatever, that has been claimed. I haven't seen any hard evidence of that or proof of that. Now, it's certainly not impossible, but I don't think that's been established.
One thing that's interesting about the videos about the car incident is that I haven't seen any video footage of how it actually started. The longest video footage that I've seen shows him plowing into a bunch of people, but we don't know where he started from and why. And then he backs out, and then he plows it, but then as he's backing out, he gets mobbed by people with clubs. And then he tries to he drives into people again. Now the second one, it looks like he is trying to escape from a beating, but when we just see the car plowing in, we don't know what state it was in before that. So to me, I don't know what the initial state was.
Yeah, that's what we don't have. What we don't have is any kind of way of viewing the events, the series of events that led up to the car running into the crowd. We do see the car running into the crowd. We do see the car backing out. We see the people with the clubs attacking the car, but we don't really know what happened before that. We don't know whether someone was trying to attack Fields in his car. We don't know if Fields felt threatened and was trying to escape the scene of whatever was going on. We don't know to what degree he singled out individuals, or whether he just ran into a crowd at random, or whatever. You know, were there certain individuals he was trying to run down? Were there people that were actually trying to block the street and he ran through them? Were the people that were injured or killed, were they simply in the wrong place at the wrong time? They just happened to be standing there. As far as any eyewitnesses or people close to the scene, of all the videos of this and first-person accounts of this that I've seen, the two on-the-ground journalists that were the closest to this, who seemed to have the best accounts, were Faith Goldie, who is with Rebel Media, which is some kind of independent media outfit. It's some kind of conservative, libertarian-ish, not alt-right, but you know, some more patriot-oriented. Well, it's the same outfit that Lauren Southern is with, but so it's not quite as extreme as some of the other alt-right groups, but it's not mainstream either. But Faith Goldie was there when the car incident happened, and she says that the car just seemed to come out of nowhere. She didn't really seem to have a clue as to why the car was speeding the way that it was, or whether any particular individuals were deliberately targeted, other than that just looked like the guy drove the car into the crowd. Another one was a reporter for the Charlottesville newspaper. This is from the regular media, just the local media in Charlottesville. This guy was actually a photographer, but he came very close to being hit by the car. He said he had actually been standing where the car passed through the street just a short time earlier, and you know, if it had happened a few minutes earlier, he would have been hit by the car. But he again said it just seemed like the car was coming out of nowhere. He didn't really seem to know where what had happened before. So the big question is, why was this car in this particular place at this time? Why was this guy barreling down the street? Was he simply trying to run over a group of protesters, simply for retaliation for their efforts to disrupt the rally? Had he been previously attacked by other people, and was he trying to escape the scene so that people would not harm him? Had he already, or was he trying to chase down someone that had done something to him previously? We don't really know the answer to any of these questions. He has been charged, last I heard, with second-degree murder for the death of Heather Heyer, which is certainly very serious. He also, as far as this guy's background, as far as what we know about him, he seems to have a troubled history. Like, apparently he lived with his mother. He was young. He was only 20 years old. And apparently he lived with his mother, and the police had been called to his house a number of times by his mother, because he had actually been threatening his mother on multiple occasions. So apparently this guy does have a troubled history, but we don't really know the details as to how this incident happened. Like, why did this guy actually run into a crowd of people?
Yeah, it would make sense that, I mean, if you're caught up in the moment where all this rioting and violence is happening, and then you see this car coming out of apparently nowhere, it really isn't surprising that it's hard for people, that there isn't a lot of people that can tell you where it was before it accelerated, because they're so confused with all this stuff going around them. But as far as I can tell, though, leading up to this, right, the right-wing groups went through all the proper channels to get a permit to do the rally. Is that correct, Keith?
Yeah, they did. They had all the required legal permits, and so did the counter protesters. They had permits as well. What happened is that about a few days before, or a week to a few days before the rally was supposed to happen, the Unite the Right rally, the city of Charlottesville tried to cancel their permit on grounds that it was a threat to public safety or whatever the grounds would have been. They actually took it to court, and with the support of a number of civil liberties-oriented groups, left and right, and they claimed that they had been victims of political discrimination. And the federal judge, ruled that that was indeed the case, noting that no one else's permit had been revoked. It was only these alt-right people who had their permit revoked. So the judge reinstated their permit to hold the rally. And that still stood as of Saturday morning when the rally took place.
All right. Can you hear us, Rufus? I'd like to get your input on the origins of this rally.
Yeah, I can semi hear you now. I've installed Yak Yak. Apparently, I had to do that. So, ask me a question, sir.
Yeah, sure. So basically, what we just started talking about what is generally known, that the rally to protest the taking down the statue of Robert E. Lee. The permits and all the legal rigmarole was properly gone through, and then it was revoked at the last moment. And then Keith just finished saying how that the ralliers were able to demonstrate that they were discriminated against politically, so their permit was reinstated. We also talked about the incident with Fields in the car. Nobody seems to know where the car started before it went on its rampage. And because certainly from the video that I saw, you see it barreling into people. Then as it backs up, it's getting mobbed by guys with clubs, and then it drives into another crowd of people. So at least the second time we see it, he was getting attacked. But the first time, we don't know where he was coming from. So maybe, do you have any information on the car incident?
Oh no, we're not even sure who this gentleman is. I mean, he seems to have been with Vanguard there. And I mean, just from the pictures I've seen, but they say that he was diagnosed with schizophrenia and he has adult onset schizophrenia. I mean, I have no idea what happened, and I mean, it could have been that he was attacked and it was having an episode. It could be that he thought he was going to drive through them. I don't know, but the facts of that case will have to come out in court. I do know that he's not part of my organization, and I've never heard of the man before. My organization, went there in order to go to a demonstration, and we had a permit and a court order to do that. And all of the members of Identity Dixie behaved themselves. And what they're telling me in the after action report that we did was that the police threw them to the wolves. That the state police were there. And when they arrived, they were put into these pens. And then when it came time for the speakers to start, the city of Charlottesville showed up and shut it all down, and then threw them to the gangs, the street gangs of Antifa. I mean, I don't know what else to call them. And then stood by and did nothing as riotous conditions, disorderly conduct was occurring in the streets. They just watched. So I think we have a pretty strong case that, this was the city of Charlottesville, that, conspired to do this. They disobeyed the courts. They told the police to stand down. Now the policemen are saying that they really resent being told to stand down. And
also, I heard rumors or discussions that the two protesters were sort of funneled into one another by the police.
That's when the park was closed, and it was the city of Charlottesville said, or the police said, that this was an illegal assembly and to disperse. So they were ordered to disperse, from the park into the streets, and the streets were surrounded by, Antifa protesters. And, that's when the violence occurred. There was a little bit of, violence on the way there, but a very low amount, as they had to walk through these people to get to the park. But once they were released, dispersed from the park, that's when Baked Alaska got, permanent eye damage from bear mace or whatever it is they threw on him. And then it was this long walk, through the streets to get back to their cars. A lot of their cars have been vandalized too. And so, you know, from what I'm hearing, it's just the city of Charlottesville, it was created, you know, these riotous conditions that they refused to put a stop to.
So yeah, actually, that's a good point. So why don't we, as far as we know, give a breakdown of how the rally started and how it devolved into this brawl. So Keith, why don't you begin by telling us who were the people there that were protesting the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee? Which groups were there that you know of?
It's hard to say because there seem to have been a lot of different groups. There was Richard Spencer, who is the self-proclaimed leader of the alt-right, and groups that are associated with him. There was Nathan D'Amigo's group, Identity, Europa, whatever. There were a range of Southern nationalist-oriented groups. There were 3%er and militia and patriot-oriented groups there. I think some Oath Keeper types. There was the Traditionalist Workers' Party. There were some other groups with a similar outlook. I think Vanguard America and some others. There was some, I guess, libertarian types and perhaps some ordinary conservative types. It seems to have been virtually the entire spectrum of what we might call the right-wing subculture. And that seemed to be the case on the left as well. You seem to have the entire spectrum of the radical left or the liberal to far left subculture as well. So it seems like pretty much the entire figuration of the radical left and the radical right were represented.
Okay, Rufus, what would you say was the stated objective of Unite the Right? What was the objective and intent there?
Could you ask your question one more time, sir?
Yeah, sure. What was the intention of the Unite the Right rally? What was their stated objective?
What was the initial? What was the purpose of it, or what?
Yeah,
was...
exactly.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Unite the Right was to actually have a demonstration, for the statue. These statues are being, taken down, or people want to take them down, and they wanted to show that there was a large group of people in the United States, or a group of people at least, that were against that, and they wanted to demonstrate and say, we identify with the statue. It represents our people, and we don't want to be replaced, or we don't want to lose our symbols. And so it was to show that sort of courage that, yeah, we're standing up for this public property, and we're the ones that we don't want it taken down. Basically that was the original idea, is to protect the statue. So
okay, so how did the violence begin to escalate? How about Keith, from your understanding, from when the rally started to when it ended, what was sort of the time lapse, if you will, of the escalation of violence?
Well, from everything that I have heard about that, from people who were there on both sides, as well as reports in the media, the entire range of the media, far left to far right and everything in between, in the morning before the rally was supposed to begin at noon, you had people from both sides that were milling into the area around Lee Park, and or whatever it's called now. Is it Emancipation Park? Is that the current name? It seems like that initially things weren't going that poorly, but it seemed to escalate up until the time that the rally was supposed to begin, when the police came in and shut it down. Faith Goldie from Rebel Media said that initially the first wave of protesters that were coming in were counter protesters, not alt-right people, not Unite the Right people, but counter protesters. The first wave of those tended to be the more peaceful group, the more civil rights, progressive church type of people and all of that. Apparently over time, as the crowd of counter protesters got larger and larger, they also got more violent. And she said that when things started to really hit the fan was when the ANTIFA showed up, and they were an organized group. They had weapons, they had rocks and bottles. They had all of this stuff that they brought with them to use for that purpose, for the purpose of throwing rocks. And they as soon as they got there, they started to essentially incite a riot. On the alt-right side, apparently they had started to assemble in the park, and everything was going well initially. At one point, they claimed that the people from the other side were trying to storm their area for the purpose of shutting down the rally, that they actually most likely the Antifa were planning on actually attacking the rally as it began in order to keep it from happening. I've also heard stories from people on both sides that there were protesters, not necessarily Antifa, but protesters generally, that were trying to block the entranceway into the park, into the rally site, to keep the alt-right people from coming in. The attendees of the Unite the Right rally, and I've seen people on the left who actually participated in this, as well as people on the right who observed this, saying that there were groups of protesters trying to block the entranceway so that the alt-right people couldn't come into the rally. I guess, in their mind, at least, civil disobedience is what they were doing. And then the alt-right people actually tried to push their way through these groups that were trying to block their way. And then the Antifa came and tried to push back against the alt-right people. That's one scenario I've seen presented. So it looks like that as soon as it came time for the rally to start, that there were people right from the start that were trying to keep the rally from happening, in the sense of either attacking the rally or blocking the movement of the people on the other side and things like that. That, I think, was the pretext that was used by the city of Charlottesville. I haven't been able to determine whether it was the city of Charlottesville administration or whether it was actually the governor of Virginia, Terry McAuliffe. It was one of the two who actually gave the order to shut down the rally by declaring a state of emergency. I'm not sure whether that order first came from the city administration or from the state administration. It may have been the state administration rather than the city.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the state police were standing there, and they just did not allow the speakers into the rally until it was time. It was the city of Charlottesville police that announced it was an illegal assembly, from what I understand.
Okay.
So, but overall, Rufus, does Keith's narrative match up with what you understand about the escalation of violence?
Keith, could you repeat his question? I'm still having trouble hearing. I'm sorry for this, gentlemen.
Do you have anything to add to Keith's question, to Keith's statement?
Oh, no. I mean, Keith is basically saying it right. I'm sure there were a lot of protesters there from the left, that were there to, fight, the, right-wing menace in their minds, and they were there to do it in the way you're supposed to do it. But, look at some of the pictures, like the gentleman with the homemade flamethrower. He's at the steps of the park, and he's, just, throwing flames around with his can or whatever. That sort of behavior is, it's illegal, right? A lot of this behavior is illegal. And if policemen witness an assault, even a simple assault, that's an arrestable offense. So, my take on it is that this is really a law and order issue, right? If you tell people to disperse, how can they leave if there are huge crowds around blocking all the roads? And, a lot of roads were cordoned off, and there were only a few ways to get out. I should also add that if Fields was already in his vehicle, which he was, I mean, was he even part of the demonstration anymore? He was just trying to leave, right? I mean, it wasn't a street thing, so, I mean, he's walking on the streets. So, I really hammer the law and order issues. I don't understand why a police officer wouldn't arrest, someone who's committing simple assault in his presence. I don't see how in any state that wouldn't occur. But, maybe, I don't know. I don't know the laws of Virginia that well. So
I can add to that.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, I can add to that. From the stories that I have heard about what the police actually did, I would say that the reason that this event spun so far out of control was, obviously the Antifa showed up for the purpose of inciting a riot. That goes without saying. I think that's been pretty well established. That's just what they do, and that's been confirmed by witnesses on both sides. There were probably at least some individuals on the other side as well who were looking for a fight or weren't about to turn one down if the opportunity presented itself. But ultimately, I think the responsibility lies with those who ordered the police to stand down rather than preserve order. What a competent police department would have done during a situation like this is that they would have had one space for the rally to take place that they had a permit for, another space for the counter protest that they had a permit for to take place, and they would have had a line of police, state and local police, separating the two groups and keeping the two groups apart. That's what competent law enforcement would have done. Instead, it seems like just the opposite was true, that the police were trying to keep the various groups as close together as possible. They, even when they dispersed the rally, they pushed the alt-right people into the crowd of protesters. They were not restraining people that were using violence. Rufus mentioned that there were people using a flamethrower and things like that, a makeshift flamethrower. As I wrote in the critique of this event that I posted on attackthesystem.com, normally when you have a public brawl like this involving hundreds of people, at least several dozen people are going to be arrested, if not hundreds of people. That's how it usually works at at hockey games and things like that when a public brawl breaks out. Instead, it seems like very few people were actually arrested. There were a couple of speakers that were arrested for trying to give a speech after they'd been ordered to stand down. I think Spencer and Nathan D'Amico were arrested. There was a few people in the crowd arrested on weapons and assault charges. I think 3 so far. And I don't know who they were with, if anyone. And then Fields was arrested. And I've also heard that there's a couple of arrest warrants out now for Christopher Cantwell for using pepper spray or something like that. But other than that, the fact that almost no one was arrested is pretty interesting, considering that they had a large police presence there at one point. And then I think even more interesting is that after the rally was shut down by the police and the rally goers for the Unite the Right side were dispersed into the crowd of protesters, the police seemed to walk off the job. I've heard reports that the police were absent for as long as 2 hours, maybe longer. So, what's going on here when you have two large crowds, hundreds of people on each side, lots of mutual combat already happening. Already you have people starting to incite a riot, and then the police just disappear. I mean, if anything, it seems like they would have called out more police or called in police from other jurisdictions or the National Guard or something like that. That's what normally happens in civil unrest like this. But
well, they had a couple of guardsmen or somebody, up on this funeral home, filming everything, right? So it seems to me like that evidence belongs to, the courts. We should be able to determine who, the primary aggressors were, who committed aggravated assaults using using weapons. We should be able to determine all that. And, I'm just really hounding on the law and order aspect here. The police sergeants should have escorted, the alt-right out of the area, said this is an illegal assembly, get out of here. And, we'll lead you through these angry crowds of violent protesters, and anyone who breaks through, we'll arrest them, for, disobeying lawful orders. So for disorderly conduct, in other words. So, it's really the police's fault. And I got to wonder what is the intention of telling policemen to stand down when you have these riotous conditions? Is it because they wanted, this media campaign, so that, these organizations that are supposedly fighting the alt-right will get money and, more and more destruction of public property will occur. I mean, that's criminal activity too. Conspiracy is the darling of the prosecutor's nursery, as the old saying goes. And so it seems to me like there's a lot of conspiracy, to have public disorder and destruction of public property and riots. So, maybe the DOJ, needs to start, going after these people, because I really don't think giving them what they want will prevent more violence. I think that there's going to be just more and more, as we go into this witch hunt atmosphere. But
well, yeah. Now, I think there was a rally a few months ago in Kentucky held by the alt-right elements that was much more peaceful, and they argued after the fact that that's what they were intending to replicate in Charlottesville. Is there anything you'd want to add about that earlier rally in Kentucky? I think it was a few months ago, Rufus.
Yeah, that's Pikeville, and TWP did that. And the League of the South and a lot of alt-right organizations showed up, and they managed to get everything done without violence. We also had Auburn. We also had New Orleans, a protest to protect the monuments down there. And things have worked out for some, but Charlottesville was announced way ahead in advance, and they got the permits, and they even had the court order, near the event itself. And it seems like if you had a police presence, that this one would have gone off without a hitch, if the police were doing what they were supposed to be doing. But I know that I don't mean to point fingers, but the local government has been incensed about this whole thing. And I think the blame, goes to them personally. But
well, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Keith.
Well, that's the same pattern I've noticed. This is what I've noticed about all of these different kinds of events. The way the event turns out depends on what kind of jurisdiction that it's in. Where the problems seem to come in is that when you have one of these kinds of events that takes place in a college town where the local university essentially controls the local government, that's where the problems start. If Charlottesville is a liberal, left-leaning college town, it has the University of Virginia there. Ironically, it's a very white bread community. Berkeley, where the Battle of Berkeley happened 4 months ago, is a culturally very mixed, but it's also a very left-leaning university town. And in both of these circumstances, these are the circumstances where you had a riot. You had the Battle of Berkeley back in April, and now you had Charlottesville last week. And in both instances, it was the same situation. You had a left-leaning college town where some people from the right wanted to have a rally, and then the left came out to do a counter protest, and a melee ensued, and the police just walked off the job and failed to keep order. That happened in Berkeley, and that happened in Charlottesville. It didn't happen in any of these other places that Rufus just mentioned, in Pikeville, in New Orleans, and Auburn. And now in Auburn, you had a lot of counter protesters, but you also had the police arresting people that got violent and things like that as well. And that was a situation where the university there had actually, Auburn University had tried to shut down Richard Spencer's appearance, and that had actually been reinstated by a federal court order as well. But it was a situation where the authorities were there keeping the peace. That didn't happen in Berkeley, and it didn't happen in Charlottesville. In both circumstances, the police essentially just walked off the job. In both circumstances, you had situations where members of the local police department, there were police officers in Berkeley that said this, and reportedly there have been police officers in Charlottesville who said this, that they were ordered to stand down. So somebody's giving them the order to stand down. This happened twice, two major rallies that ended in a riot, and both of them were in left-leaning college towns. So it appears that in both, what I'm inclined to believe is that in both of these circumstances, the city administration wanted there to be a melee of this type, or at least they, for what, I'm not sure why. I mean, I don't know that it was to the protesters' benefit to have a melee like that. It was actually someone from their side that got killed. The people that got hit by the car and all that were on their side. So I don't know how it helps the protesters, but it helps. For some reason, the local administration in both of these. The local municipal administration in both of these circumstances ordered the police to stand down, and that really is what allowed things to escalate out of control.
Yeah, I was just going to say before you go, Rufus, is why do these rank and file street fighters on the left pick these fights? They always get their butts kicked. And do they enjoy getting beat up?
Well, it's almost a religious they're almost like martyrs for like some sort of religious cause, I think. The police in Auburn did very well because they enforced anti-mask ordinances that are left over from, the Klan and the Civil Rights era. And they insisted on searching backpacks to make sure weapons weren't going, onto campus. And that worked out. I mean, if people did not take off their masks, they didn't get to go until they did. And if they didn't let their backpacks get searched, then they certainly weren't going to be on campus. And, that worked out. And I think we had an aggravated assault with a left winger with a lock and a sock or something that hit a right winger. And, that's going to be a aggravated assault between those parties. It's not this, mass riotous condition, between different organizations. So
yeah. One thing, of course, is there's really two responses that are interesting to look at. We'll look at them in turn. First, the mainstream media, and then the sort of general populist response. Now, the mainstream media, being the mainstream media, does what it does. If a guy driving a car into a bunch of people, I immediately thought of Muslims, the religion of peace, right? I mean, if this guy were a Muslim, as we saw in Nice and other places, Paris, that by running a vehicle into a crowd of people, what is the first thing they say if it's a Muslim? Well, we can't let hate triumph. We've got to understand the Muslim. Well, where is the understanding for this guy?
Yeah, it's always the case where I've noticed that as well. I think that if the guy driving the car had been any other affiliation other than someone on the right, if he had been a Marxist or an ANTIFA or a Muslim, they would say, this guy was driven to desperation by, his zeal for a righteous cause or whatever. With this guy, with Fields, obviously that's not the position they're taking. And it does seem to me to be something of a double standard, particularly since we've had a terrorist attack involving the use of a vehicle this way in Barcelona just yesterday. And I'm still seeing more about Charlottesville in the media than I am the incident in Barcelona. Now, of course, Charlottesville is in the United States and Barcelona is elsewhere, so there is some justification for that, perhaps. But it is interesting how you don't get the same reaction. When we see a terrorist attack by an Islamist, we don't see the media saying, well, this just shows how awful hate is. I mean, obviously the Islamic extremists that engage in terrorism are motivated by hate. I mean, they're not practicing love your neighbor. I mean, that goes without saying. So there is a total double standard. I mean, there's no way around that. I mean, just in terms of all the accounts that I have heard of what was going on in Charlottesville, from people who were there and from the independent media from across the spectrum, including people who don't have a dog in the fight. They're just, it's just a matter of curiosity, and including people on the left even. All of those accounts totally diverge from what the mainstream media is saying. Most mainstream media accounts of Charlottesville I've seen, it's just, neo-Nazis had a rally in Charlottesville. They attacked protesters, and some guy ran over protesters with a car. I mean, that's not even close to being the whole story. You would think that the Antifa don't even exist from listening to some of these accounts, or that or it was all the counter protesters were just all Martin Luther King types. I mean, it's the level of bias is really unbelievable.
Yeah, that's actually an alt-right talking point where you guys were talking about earlier, that we always, unless it's, the white patriarchy that committed the crime or some representative thereof, the motives are always seen as inscrutable. Like we may never know, why this guy did this, if he were a Muslim or something. But, when, a white does something wrong, it's obviously, because the whites are to blame. It's like we were to blame for Dylan Roof and doing what he did, and that's an alt-right talking point. And as for hate or emotions are not criminal conduct. They're not a crime. What's a crime is actual criminal conduct, like assault. That's a crime. And so why is the media talking about hate? What does that have to do with anything? What about the actual conduct? Tell me the facts of what happened there, because the courts are going to want to know. Because the things that I've seen like Kessler tried to have a press conference in front of a courthouse, and he was attacked there. And let me tell you, if we don't have law and order on courthouse property, I mean, we just don't have law and order.
Well, yeah. I mean, this basically it's like 1984, right? Love is hate, peace is war, and things like that. So one of the things that we'll see, for instance, with last year in Dallas, where the BLM sniper murdered 5. Well, he was inspired by BLM's propaganda. The black sniper that murdered 5 policemen. This was actually premeditated murder, not some, from best we can tell, some scared guy in the middle of a crowd. And yet, a slap on the wrist. Oh well, you're just racist if you don't like them, and cops are racist. And I'm like, wait, this guy just murdered 5 cops.
Yeah, we had the worst shooting in U.S. history happen last year, and it was, between a Muslim and he was attacking, gays, in the United States. Well, those are both clients of the Democratic Party, so I mean, there's no useful narrative for the left, right? So I guess it's been dropped. I guess it's not a big deal that we had the worst shooting in American history last year. What's going to be a big deal and what needs to be psychoanalyzed and agonized over for the next few months is the fact that there's some white guys with hate in their hearts somewhere. It's like I thought we had laws, and that Sam Francis called this anarcho-tyranny, where it seems like the law-abiding, get tyrannized. And then, and he uses anarchy in the pejorative. I apologize to my, my interlocutors here. I don't agree, but, anarchy is in chaos. The people that are engaging in chaos, they get let off the leash, where the laws don't apply to them. So, what I'm asking for right now, personally, on behalf of my organization is I simply want law and order. I think the facts are on the side of my men. And I would like that, to get out to the public, and I think the courts will know that. I think we're going to win some court cases out of this. But, what I'm afraid of is that the authorities, are you gentlemen still here?
I'm here. I think Keith dropped out.
Okay. What I'm personally worried about is that the authorities, in order to get law and order back, that they're going to give, these criminal street gangs what they want. Let's have a show trial of an alt-righter. Let's run them out with rails. Let's blame them for everything. Or that's what I'm personally afraid of. It's like, we didn't do anything wrong, and I don't think giving in is going to do anything that's good for this country. Giving in to the Antifa.
Well, yeah. I mean, basically, Trump got a lot of flack from the mainstream media for actually pointing out the Antifa presence and the violent presence of the left. And really what this shows us is that the radical left-wing domestic terrorist groups like, BLM and Antifa get a free rein to commit murder and terrorism, and any white person that engages in self-defense is going to get taken to the woodshed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that seems to be the trend.
And that's the whole meme of anarcho-tyranny. I mean, that's what they're talking about. It's like, if you're white middle class, and it's like you can do no right. But if you're a client, if you're part of the cultural Marxist victim group, some cultural Marxist victim group, well, then you can do no wrong. All your conduct is it's understandable. If they can't save you, they'll say, well, your motives are inscrutable. And it's, I don't know. You know how exactly. I feel about it.
Oh yeah, no, but yeah. That's true, because, I mean, literally, in all these cases, well, not only that, I mean, even when the white guy didn't do it, he gets blamed, because there was an Egyptian couple in California that had that gun people down, and the first thing they reported was white people did it. Then it was an Egyptian couple that was a recent immigrant. So.
Well, the same with Zimmerman. I mean, Zimmerman is, a Hispanic American, and he's got, it's a mixed family. I mean, he's got black members of his family. I mean, he's not, but he was, they're going to turn down the tent and make him look as white as possible, and we know how that turned out. The courts came down on the side of Zimmerman,
Yeah.
right? Despite the media campaign. And so they've set themselves up for another one of these, where the courts will come down on our side. I'm pretty sure.
So were you able to listen in, Keith, to hear what we were talking about?
I think I missed a part of the conversation there.
No, yeah, we were just saying, I'd like to get your feedback on it, that, Trump getting attacked for pointing out the left-wing violence that was involved and the sort of protection that Antifa gets. These domestic terrorist groups are just given a blank check to commit acts of vandalism, murder, and assault, and any white person that defends themselves is going to get taken to the woodshed.
Well, that's been a big part of my own coverage of this. I wrote up a summary of the timeline of events as best I could put it together and posted that on Attack the System. And I did an updated version of that a couple of days later. I was on Tom Woods' show yesterday talking about it. And one thing that I have tried to point out in all of that is the fact that there were violent people on the left. In fact, people on the left have attacked me saying, well, you're carrying water for the neo-Nazis and all that. I'm like, that's nonsense. I mean, now where appropriate, I've tried to point out examples or alleged examples of excessive conduct on the right side, on the right-wing side as well. So I haven't tried to gloss over that. That hasn't been my intention at all. But it does seem to me that this narrative we're getting from the mainstream media is one that just pretends that there was no left-wing violence going on at this. And this is something that I've noticed over and over again in mainstream media coverage of these events. That they just pretend like this Antifa group doesn't exist, or that, or if they do, they're just do-gooders in a hurry, perhaps misguided at times. And that's not the case at all. I mean, the Antifa are hardline communists in many instances. There are Maoists, Trotskyites, Leninists, Castroists that participate in that tendency. There are anarchists in it as well. Now, I see the anarchists that are in it as just dupes, but this is a violent leftist group that's akin to something like the Weather Underground or something like that. These are not just do-gooders in a hurry. And that aspect of this always gets ignored. In fact, a lot of lay people that have no experience dealing with radical groups probably would not know who the Antifa are if they saw them in a video. Like, a lot of times people will look at a video of one of these incidents and they see these people with masks and clubs and sticks and pepper spray, and they assume that the Antifa are neo-Nazis. I've actually known just ordinary people who aren't into these kinds of things who had seen videos like that and say, yeah, well, aren't they neo-Nazis, the people with the masks and all that? I'm like, no, this is a group from the hard left. But they act just like neo-Nazis, like skinheads or something like that. So that's what people assume they are. So I think that is something that really needs to be pointed out. And the fact that there are apparently so many people in the media that cover for this or just ignore it or don't think it's an issue. Whether that's deliberate, whether they just assume that the Antifa are on the side of the angels and just choose to not discuss this, who knows? But that's something I think that really gets lost here in these discussions.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The most of the old, paleos, like my paleo friends, it's like they didn't know. And so what the alt-right is doing, we're talking to all our old paleo friends and explaining, that there is this organization called Antifa. It's funny that they don't know. It's I can't help but see it as the media carrying water for them. So.
Well, yeah. I think one thing that Donald Trump brought up in his press conference that was very important was he said, okay, if we take down the statues of Lee, Jackson, and Davis, who's next? Jefferson and Washington and those guys? And this kind of strikes me as the whole 1984 alternate reality where history's rewritten every 6 months and you don't know what happened, 6 months ago. And what they're doing is they're creating this brave new world 1984 reality And they're doing it by I mean, really, this is the kind of stuff that you see like in ancient Egypt. Like one pharaoh would remove the names of a previous pharaoh and take credit for what he did. You know, this kind of level of pettiness is something we see with totalitarian or authoritarian regimes. And I can't help but see this as a kind of, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if every monument that was not erected after 1960s torn down at some point. And what that smacks of to me is this sort of effacing of history. You know, I think it was in 1984, right? He who controls the present controls the past. He who controls the past controls the present. So I see that there's a lot of, that's what I interpret this as. What would your guys' thoughts be?
Yeah, it's a lot like you know, Huxley and Orwell, you know, together or something. I think that's, you know, basically correct. You know, like history is being rewritten, and I think you're basically right.
I tend to agree with that in the sense that this is the issue that I see. A lot of more mainstream people who are in favor of taking down the Confederate statues will say that's not the same thing as the statues of Lincoln and Jefferson and all that, because the Confederates, well, they were just traitors to America and all of these kinds of things. And their state existed specifically for the purpose of perpetrating slavery and all of this. Whereas when it comes to America, well, yeah, slavery is an unpleasant aspect of American history, but that's not the entirety of American history. But I'll say this, it's only the more moderate left that feels that way. The far, far left doesn't feel that way. To them, there's no difference between George Washington and Jefferson Davis or someone like that. So the more powerful the hard left gets, the more they will start to agitate to take down statues of George Washington or Thomas Jefferson, or to rename the boulevards and streets that are named after them. So I think you will start to see that eventually. I mean, they already do that with Columbus Day, for example, and I think the more influential they become, the more emboldened they will be. I'm not someone personally that has a great deal of attachment to or outrage, either one, about inanimate objects. I'm in favor of preserving the Confederate monuments just as a part of history and all of that. But what I see as being the problem is more what Todd was pointing out. It's more of this kind of 1984 environment where you've always got to rewrite history in order to update it so that it matches the current party line. So for example, right now it's the Confederacy. Well, the Confederacy was racist. They were trying to defend slavery, so we have to erase the memory of that. Okay. Then the next step would be to erase the wider American history, George Washington and all of that stuff. All right, where does it go after that? For example, are we going to take down statues of Martin Luther King because he might have opposed gay marriage, for example, or because he was a clergyman, so that's offensive to atheists? If you could take, there's no stopping point with this kind of stuff once you start taking it in a certain direction. Is the point?
Well, it's a utopianism, and it's a religious vision of the future that's about to become. And they're not very concerned with the past because that future, that eschaton is going to be so good, and it's a religious fervor. So this is no different than the French Revolution or Salem witch trial. It's this wild frenzy, and the revolution eats its own children. So what's going to happen? What happened in France was you ended up with a strong man that put a stop to everything. Right. And those Americans or U.S. citizens that value, our Anglo-Saxon liberty or any of that, I mean, all that's going to go out the window if you don't insist upon it right now, because the revolution will consume all those things and it will end up eating its own children. And then you'll end up with some sort of tyrant, so.
One thing I want to point out in this is, I saw a really interesting article that was posted yesterday in the American Conservative magazine by Rod Dreher. And he's talking about the results of a poll that was taken since Charlottesville occurred. And it was taken by NPR and PBS, National Public Radio and PBS. So that's mainstream media, one of the more liberal leaning sectors of the mainstream media. But what they're showing in this public opinion poll is interesting because it shows how different normal people are from the media and from other groups in terms of their thinking. For example, it talks about how, about Trump's approval rating. It says that Charlottesville has not impacted Trump's approval rating one way or the other. It says 62% of Americans favor leaving the Confederate monuments standing as historical markers. 86% of Republicans, 61% of independents, 43% of Democrats. 43% of strong Democrats, 48% of soft Democrats. It's only, in other words, what this data shows is that only the hard left and the media seem to be the ones that have all the problems as far as the monuments and all of that. 44% of African Americans polled believe in keeping the statue standing. Of Latinos, 65% believe that the statues should remain. The Northeast is the only region of the country most in favor of removing the statues, or at least and only 53% there, so only a slight majority. Americans overwhelmingly approve, over 90% of white supremacists, white nationalists, the KKK. 8 times as many disapprove of the alt-right as approve, but almost half of Americans don't know who they are in the first place. So it's interesting to see how the people on the margins are getting worked up about stuff that mainstream people have no clue about. It seems like it's more the media that's fueling a lot of this, and ordinary people are like, what's all this about?
Yeah, well, we're nearing the end of the hour, so is there anything that you, Keith, would like to end with, or you, Rufus?
I'll let Keith go ahead.
All right. The only thing I would add to this is that I've been predicting for a while after the Battle of Berkeley that someone was going to get killed in this. And I asked one of our co-editors at Attack the System after Battle of Berkeley happened, I said, how long do you think it's going to be before somebody gets killed in one of these conflicts? And he said about 4 months. And sure enough, it's August. 4 months later, something happened. So I see that as being the issue. I think people just need to calm down and get a life. And I think that as we've been talking, the real responsibility for Charlottesville lies with the state authorities that couldn't, as Rufus says, couldn't maintain basic public safety and public order. I mean, that's the common sense. I mean, this is some of the crummiest police work I've ever seen done. It's like, what were they thinking about? And it seems to me to have been deliberate. I mean, I can't believe a police department could be this incompetent. And we hear stories of cops saying that they were ordered to stand down. So it looks like this is something that the city administration wanted to happen, and it looks like it was a repeat of what happened in Berkeley. In other circumstances where the police have been there to keep law and order, when these events go down, we haven't had this problem. It's only these 2 situations. So it looks like there's the same pattern.
Yeah. So go ahead, Rufus.
Yeah. I mean, after, on the night after, Saturday night, I wrote, the Imagine, little bit of writing, and it was to capture the frustration that, that we feel. It's like, I think, we were doing everything right, and it's like, we're not even allowed to have freedom of speech. And right now, the big business is taking away our ability to talk online. They're killing all our sites. PayPal is stealing all our money. And, I just think that, the class up in DC, they've been really gaslit by the media. If they go on campaign, they're going to be spat upon by their constituents, because like Keith was saying, mainstream Americans, they're not like this. And they're going to insist upon having, basic law and order. And I have a lot of faith in my people, and what we did was right. And it's going to come out in the wash that what we did was right, or at least, I can only speak for my own people. But yeah.
I've got one thing I'd like to add, one brief thing.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Keith.
That is, at present, I don't know of that many circumstances where the state itself in the United States is that much of a threat to free speech, with the only major exception being this proposed legislation that would criminalize the BDS movement to boycott Israel. But other than that, I don't know of specific examples where the state itself is trying to crack down on political freedom. Most of the threats to political freedom at this point seem to come from corporations and the university system. And I'm starting to develop the view that what we need to do is we need to extend the Constitution to apply to corporations and universities, unless it's a purely private university, like some are. But as long as it's state or state-funded universities and corporations, we need to perhaps consider extending the Constitution to apply to these institutions as well, since they are essentially arms of the state, since they're essentially the economic and educational arms of the state. It used to be that the Constitution was not considered to apply to the state and local governments, which made sense when we had a confederation of independent states. Obviously that's not what we have now. So the courts along the way have ruled that yes, the Constitution applies to state and local governments. A case could be made, I think, to extend the Constitution to corporations and universities as well.
Hear, hear.
Yeah. So funny thing is, this is 40 years after the neo-Nazi march in Skokie. So lots changed in 40 years. Thanks for showing up, guys. This is Todd Lewis, the Praise of Folly podcast, signing off.